Hello everyone, tonight's story is about Aldrich, a fallen human knight, and Cora, the orc general who hunted him for 3 years, because sometimes one last coin, one buried truth, and one mercy given in the rain can turn an old enemy into the person worth standing beside.
The city of Durnwall smelled like rotting cabbage and old grudges, and Aldrich Vane moved through it the way a man moves through a place that has already decided to reject him, quietly, without eye contact, shoulders drawn inward just enough to discourage conversation. The rain had started before dawn and had not stopped. It was the kind of rain that did not fall so much as hang in the air, clinging to wool and leather and the thin spaces between cobblestones. His boots had stopped being waterproof 2 cities ago. His breath came out in pale clouds that dispersed before they could become anything useful. He had 1 coin left. He knew its weight without touching it. A single copper disc, worn smooth on one face, where a long-dead king's profile had been pressed into the metal. He had carried it for 11 days without spending it, which was perhaps the most disciplined thing he had done in 3 years. The coin represented tonight's meal and tomorrow's crossing fee at the border checkpoint, if the guards were in a generous mood. If they were not, and they rarely were, when they recognized his face, the coin would cover one but not both. He was 34 years old. He had once commanded 40 men in the field and been trusted with the defense of the Ashcroft garrison. That felt like someone else's life now. A story told about a man who no longer existed. The torn edge of his cloak caught his eye as he walked. The insignia had been there once, a silver hawk on black field, the mark of the Lauren order. It had been cut away so many times by so many different hands that only a ghost of the stitching remained, pale threads like the memory of something important. He had stopped trying to replace it. The mark would only invite more cutting. The market at Durnwall's eastern gate was winding down for the evening. Merchants pulled canvas over their stalls with the mechanical efficiency of people who had been doing the same task for 20 years. The smell of bread from the baker's stall made Aldrich's jaw ache. He counted the remaining loaves behind the glass with the practiced patience of a man who has learned that wanting and having are 2 entirely different countries. A pair of city guards stood near the gate arch. One of them clocked Aldrich as he approached and leaned toward his partner. Aldrich did not need to hear what was said. He had seen the lean before, the slight narrowing of eyes, the reassessment, the decision about whether someone was worth the effort of harassment or simply worth watching. He was watched. He passed under the gate and through to the inner market square without breaking stride. A child of about 7 ran out from between 2 stalls and stopped in the middle of the path and stared up at him. Children did this sometimes in border towns. They had heard the name from somewhere, attached it to a face they had been told to recognize, arrived at the conclusion that a real person had become a symbol of something that required staring. Aldrich stopped walking and waited. The child stared for another full second, then turned and ran back the way it had come, shouting something he did not catch. He kept walking. This was the economy that existed below the economy. Bruised apples sold for what they were worth, bent nails traded for thread, bread crusts exchanged for information. Aldrich had lived in this economy for most of the past 2 years. He understood its logic better than he understood most things. It was here that he saw her. She was sitting against the market wall, close enough to the gate that she caught the light from the torches, but far enough back that she sat in partial shadow. A hood pulled low. A bundle of cloth pressed against her side that might have been a pack, or might have been everything she owned. Her hands were folded in her lap, and they were the wrong hands for a beggar. Aldrich noticed this the way he noticed most things, without deciding to notice, the information simply arriving in the part of his mind that had been trained for 11 years to read threat and need simultaneously. The hands were too still. A person who was truly hungry and cold fidgeted, pulled at their clothing, shifted their weight in the small, restless way of a body that could not find comfort. This woman was not fidgeting. She was managing her stillness deliberately, which meant she had the capacity and the training to do so. She was also an orc. The hood could not entirely hide the color of her skin, a deep green visible at her jaw and the backs of her hands. One small tusk curved up slightly from her lower lip. She had turned her face down, which minimized it, another controlled choice. Her shoulders, even slumped, were broad. She was tall, even sitting. The torn travel clothes she wore were convincing in their damage, but the damage was too even, too considered. Real poverty produced random wear. This wore like a costume. He told himself none of this was his concern. He had not eaten since yesterday morning. He had a border to cross. He had a coin. He kept walking. He made it 7 steps past her before he stopped. Quick note before we continue, if you want hotter and uncensored orc-bound fantasy romance stories, I'll be sharing them on my Patreon page. These are the deeper and more intense scenes I can't post here, so check the description for details. He did not look back at her immediately. He stood still for a moment in the middle of the square, while a woman with a basket brushed past him, and a child ran between his legs chasing something. The noise of the market's last hour moved around him. He looked at the baker's stall. He looked at the gate. He reached into his pocket and felt the coin, smooth, cold, precise. Then he turned around. She had not moved. He walked back to her and crouched down to her level, not looming, not standing over, a practical decision based on the basic human courtesy of not making a sitting person look up at someone twice their height. Up close, her jaw was set with the particular rigidity of someone refusing to acknowledge pain. There was real dirt on her hands, genuine cold in the stillness of her breathing. Whatever she was doing here, the cold was not performance. He held the coin out. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she looked at his face. He met her eyes and found them amber gold, the color of firelight caught in something older than fire, and there was nothing soft in them. Nothing grateful. Nothing begging. They assessed him with a precision that would have been alarming if he were someone who could afford to be alarmed. "I'm not looking for charity," she said. Her voice was low and controlled, with the careful flatness of someone translating their thoughts through a language that was not the first one they spoke in. "I'm not giving charity," Aldrich said. "I'm leaving a coin with someone who looks like they need it more than I do tonight." A pause. The gold eyes moved over him. His boots, his cloak with its ghost of stitching, the hollows under his cheekbones, the drawn quality of a man who had not eaten properly in days. She was doing the calculation he had just done, and she was faster at it than she should have been. "You don't have another," she said. It was not a question. "No." He agreed. Something shifted in her expression. It was not gratitude, or at least not any version of gratitude he recognized. It was more like something had come loose inside a very tightly held mechanism, some component that had not expected to be moved. It lasted only a moment. Then the gold eyes went still again, and she looked back down at his hand. He set the coin on the cobblestone between them because he could see she was not going to take it from his fingers, and he stood up. He walked away without waiting to see if she picked it up. He found shelter that night in a stable at the edge of the trade district, where a hostler named Bram let wandering men sleep in the hayloft in exchange for mucking out stalls before dawn. It was not the worst arrangement Aldrich had made in the past 3 years. The horses were warm and unbothered by his presence. He lay in the hay and listened to the rain on the roof and thought about the woman at the gate. He thought about her hands mostly, the absolute stillness in them. He had been a knight long enough to know how a person carried themselves when they were only pretending to be small. The compression of genuine threat into the posture of harmlessness was a skill that took years to develop. He had watched orc soldiers do it once, in the early days of the war, when both sides were still trying to move through the same border towns without incident. The ability to make yourself invisible was not a civilian skill. He told himself it was not his business. He was cold, hungry, and crossing the border in the morning with no money. He had no room in his circumstances for curiosity about anyone else's affairs. He slept badly and dreamed about Cold Water Ridge, the way he always did. and woke before dawn with the familiar cold feeling in his chest, and the equally familiar discipline of breathing through it until it passed. He mucked out 4 stalls. He was given a heel of bread and a cup of thin porridge. He ate both standing at the stable door, watching the city wake up in grey light. And he thought he saw a figure in a dark hood moving along the far wall of the trade district. The figure was gone before he could be certain. He crossed the border at midday, with nothing to offer the guard but his name. The guard was young enough that the name meant nothing to him, and he waved Aldrich through with the incurious efficiency of someone who had been processing travellers since before Aldrich's name had become what it was. Aldrich felt the old bitterness rise and flatten itself. He had stopped deciding how to feel about his name. He simply carried it. The road beyond the checkpoint led north through flat winter farmland, bare fields stretching away on both sides, the occasional cold farmhouse standing distant and shuttered. The rain had stopped, but the sky had not. It was the colour of old pewter, low and close, and the wind moved across the open ground with the determined cruelty of a thing that had been travelling a long distance and was not going to stop for one man. He heard footsteps behind him after about half an hour. He did not turn immediately. He had learned, after 2 years of being hunted by various parties, who wanted various things from him, most of which involved his imprisonment or death, that turning immediately was a way of showing a follower that you were worried. Instead, he adjusted his stride, letting the footsteps calibrate behind him, and catalogued what they told him. 1 person, medium to heavy build, longer stride than average. Not hurrying, not trying to be silent, which meant either confidence or inexperience, and nothing about the quality of those footsteps suggested inexperience. He stopped at a wayside stone and bent as if to adjust his bootlace, which was not loose, and in the movement he turned his head and looked back along the road. The woman from the gate was 40 paces behind him. She had traded the hood for a dark wrap that covered most of her face and throat, but the height was the same. The broad shoulders, the particular quality of motion he had catalogued the night before. She stopped when he stopped, which was not the behaviour of someone who had coincidentally chosen the same road on the same morning. He finished the pretense with his bootlace and stood up. He kept walking. For 2 days she followed him. He let her. He did not know why exactly. Partly because he had nothing she could take, partly because he was genuinely curious, the way he had always been curious about things that did not fit the pattern he expected. Partly because he was lonely in a way he had stopped admitting to himself, and even the company of someone who was clearly following him for unknown reasons was a kind of company. She kept her distance, always enough road between them that pretense was possible. At night she made her own camp 20 paces from his, and he could see the small glow of her fire in the dark, and knew she was not sleeping. Not fully, because the quality of the silence from her direction was too alert. On the 2nd evening he caught a rabbit and cooked it over his fire, and split the portion in half, leaving 1/2 at the edge of his firelight where she would see it when she came close enough. In the morning it was gone, and there was a small pile of dried mushrooms left in its place. They did not speak. On the 3rd day he stopped at a roadside well, and she came to it at the same time he did, and they stood across from each other in the full cold daylight, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and there was a long moment of very loaded silence. "If you want to travel together," Aldrich said, "you're welcome to stop pretending you aren't." She studied him for a long time. Up close, without the full shadow of the hood, he could see her clearly. The green of her skin deepening at her temples, and the line of her jaw, the small tusks that curved like the tips of a young animal's first horns, the network of fine scars across her left cheekbone that might have been made by a blade in a long-ago fight. Her dark hair was pulled back with a practical severity. Her eyes, the amber gold he remembered, were doing what they had done at the gate, reading him with an attention that was trained and relentless and not particularly friendly. "You know I'm following you," she said. "I know you're following me," he confirmed. "And you're not afraid." He considered this. "I've been afraid of most things at some point or another. I'm not sure you particularly qualify at the moment." One corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. "You gave me your last coin." "I did." "That was either very generous or very stupid." "Possibly both," Aldrich said. "I find they're not always separable." The knot smile again, and this time it lasted a fraction longer before she controlled it. Her name, she said, was Mira. She was traveling north. She had no other explanation and offered none, and Aldrich, who understood the particular etiquette of people who did not want to explain themselves, did not ask for one. He simply turned and resumed walking, and after a moment he heard her footsteps fall in beside him, and that was how they began. She was not what she had been pretending to be. He had known this from the gate, but travelling beside her clarified the picture in ways that passive observation had not. She moved wrong for a beggar or a refugee. Every bridge they crossed, she clocked the sight lines. Every inn-yard they passed, her eyes went to the exits first. When they stopped for the night at an abandoned way station, a wooden structure, 3 walls still standing, roof mostly intact, she did not set her pack down until she had walked the perimeter, which she did casually, as if stretching her legs, which would have been convincing if he hadn't watched her pause at each corner to look into the dark. She caught him watching her on the second evening, and for a moment her expression shifted into something colder and more guarded, the look of someone expecting to be called out. He said, "There's a collapsed section on the north wall, about 6 feet from the corner. You can see the road through it. Better sight line than the door." She held the cold look for a second longer. Then she went to look at the section he had described. When she came back to the fire, the look was different. Not warm, not friendly. But she sat down on his side of the fire rather than across from it, which was small but specific. Their conversations, when they happened, circled things without landing on them directly. She asked him about the border regions, the road conditions, whether the river crossing at Maren's Ford had frozen yet. Practical questions with practical answers. He asked about her travels, and she answered briefly, and he did not push, because there were things he was not pushing either, and it seemed fair to extend the same courtesy. On the third evening, she asked about the war. Not directly. She said, "You fought in the border campaigns." "I did." Aldrich said, "Which side?" "The human side." He paused. "For most of it." The fire crackled. She did not say anything, which was a particular kind of pressure. "It didn't end the way I expected it to end," he said. That was the most compressed version of the truth he had managed to produce on the subject. "Most wars don't." She said, "No." He looked at the fire. "But most soldiers end wars on the same side they started them." Another silence. She was watching him with the amber eyes, and he had the distinct impression that she was weighing something. A decision, a calculation, something that required more information than she currently had. He recognized the look because he had worn it himself at various strategic junctures, and its presence on a woman who was supposedly a wandering traveler with no name beyond Mira was another data point in a profile that was increasingly difficult to explain. "What did you do?" she asked. Not unkindly, but with a directness that had nothing casual in it. Something that looked like betrayal. Aldrich said, "From a distance." "And from close up?" He was quiet for a moment. A log shifted in the fire and sent a shower of sparks upward into the dark. "From close up," he said, "it looked like someone trying to stop something that should never have started." She did not ask him to elaborate. He did not elaborate. But the quality of silence between them changed slightly, in the way that silences change when something real has been said inside them, even a real thing that stopped short of being complete. They were 4 days out of Durnwall when the bounty hunters found them. There were 3 of them, which was more than usual but not surprising. The price on Aldrich's head had apparently increased since his last reliable information on the subject. They came from a side road that connected to the main track, and they had the efficient, unhurried movement of professionals who had done this particular work many times, The leader was a large man with a crossbow already braced. The other two were flanking, which was correct tactics for a single target on an open road. They had not, Aldrich noted, correctly assessed the situation. "Aldrich Vane," the man with the crossbow said. "There's a warrant from the Lauren order. You can walk or be carried." Aldrich stopped walking. Beside him, he was aware of Mira also stopping, and of a particular stillness descending over her that was different from her usual controlled quiet. This was the stillness before action, the stillness of something coiled. "I'll remind you," Aldrich said, keeping his voice level, "that the Lauren Order's warrant doesn't hold jurisdiction north of the Marin River. We're south of the Marin River. We crossed it this morning." He paused. "At the ford. You may have missed the boundary marker. It was partially covered in ice." The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, which was not long, but it was long enough. Mira moved. He had been watching her peripherally, which was how he almost missed the full economy and precision of what she did. She went left and forward simultaneously, inside the arc of the flanking man on that side, and the movement was not a beggar's scramble or a refugee's panic. It was a soldier's movement, controlled and angular, making use of the space the flanking man had misread as safe. She had him disarmed and against the road bank in the space of 3 seconds, and the sound she made while doing it was very quiet, which was somehow more alarming than loudness would have been. Aldrich had used the distraction to close the distance to the crossbowman, who discharged his bolt wide when Aldrich's shoulder connected with his forearm. The third bounty hunter took one look at the situation, his colleague on the ground, Mira standing over him with a grip that made clear he was not going to move, Aldrich now holding the crossbow, and made the sensible decision to retreat at speed. The man pinned against the bank was staring up at Mira with an expression of pure, bewildered terror. She stepped back. She straightened her travel wrap. She looked once at the forest where the third hunter had disappeared, and the look she gave it was the look of someone assessing whether a pursuit was worth the time investment and deciding it was not. Then she looked at Aldrich. He was looking at her. She held the look for a moment. Then, "The Lauren Order, they're still after you." "Apparently," Aldrich said. "Even this far north." "They're thorough," he agreed. "Or they're paying well, one of the two." She made a sound that might, in a different context, have been humor. Then she picked up her pack, which she had somehow managed not to drop during any of that, and they continued north. They did not discuss what had happened, and Aldrich did not ask questions, because he was busy with his own thoughts, which were reordering themselves around a new and specific understanding. A beggar, a wanderer, a woman named Mira, who read sightlines on bridges and cleared perimeters before sitting down and moved through 3 professional fighters with the spare efficiency of someone who had been doing this since before fighting professionally was a choice. He knew this woman. Not personally, not her face, but the name he had been thinking of for 3 years, the name that appeared in his nightmares alongside Cold Water Ridge, the name that had sent runners north looking for him, the name attached to the warrant that was less formal than the Lauren orders, but infinitely more dangerous, was General Cora of the Ashbone clan. The Orc general who had lost her commanding officer at Cold Water Ridge and built her reputation on hunting down the man responsible. He walked beside her for another half-mile before he spoke. "How long?" he said. "Have you known?" She did not ask what he meant. "Since the gate," she said. "When you gave me the coin. You recognized me. I have been looking for you for 3 years," she said flatly. "I know your face better than my own." The road was very quiet. "Then why—" he started. "I don't know," she said. The flatness in her voice was different now. It was not the controlled flatness of someone managing their expression. It was something raw, something that had not expected to be this honest. "I have been trying to understand it since that night." They made camp in the ruins of a watchtower that evening, which had enough walls remaining to break the wind and enough ceiling to keep the snow off. The fire was small and careful. Both of them understood, without discussing it, that the bounty hunters' retreat did not mean the bounty hunters were gone. She told him her name in the dark, not the traveling name, her full name. General Cora Ashbone, commanding officer of the 3rd Clan March, senior military authority of the Northern Orc Alliance. She said it with the flat precision of someone reading a formal record, and when she finished, she looked at him as if she was waiting for him to run. "I know," Aldrich said. A pause. "How long?" "After the hunters. I should have realized sooner." "You could have run," she said. "When you realized." "Could I?" he said. It was not entirely a question. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were wrapped around a tin cup of water heated at the fire, and she was looking at them rather than at him, and he recognized the posture. He had worn it himself. It was the posture of someone working up to something they did not particularly want to say. "At Coldwater Ridge," she said. Her voice was carefully even, the way voices become carefully even when the subject beneath them is anything but. The gate of the eastern holding was opened from the inside before the main assault. The holding's garrison was led by a Lauren Order knight. She paused. When the assault reached the eastern holding, there was no one left inside to fight. There were 600 Orc civilians, women, elderly, wounded soldiers, who had been sheltering there. They were alive. The garrison's commander was gone. Another pause, and her voice changed texture, becoming something harder with effort. "Commander Oren Ashbone, my uncle. He was one of the wounded soldiers. He lived." Aldrich looked at the fire. "The official record," Cora continued, "states that the Lauren Order Knight opened the eastern gate for tactical reasons. It was interpreted as a betrayal of the Order, a cowardice in the face of assault. The knight was stripped of rank and expelled." Her voice was very controlled. "But the tactical reason was never officially given. And the 600 civilians were never explained, because explaining them would require explaining why they were in the holding, and explaining that would require explaining why they were brought inside the holding in the first place." "Yes," Aldrich said quietly. "They were brought in by the garrison's commander," she said. "Yes. You. Yes." The fire was the only sound for a long time. "The order from Lauren High Command," Aldrich said at last, "was to hold the eastern gate. Not to shelter civilians, not to negotiate, not to open the gate. To hold the gate, which in practical terms meant that when the Allied advance came through, the holding would be a staging point. Anyone inside would be cleared." He paused, and the word "cleared" sat in the air between them with all the weight of what it meant. "There were 600 people in the outer valley who had nowhere to go. I brought them inside. I opened the eastern gate before the assault because the alternative was 600 people being cleared along with the holding." "The Lauren Order said you opened it to save yourself," Cora said. The Lauren Order needed a reason that did not require admitting their commander had ordered a civilian massacre as part of a tactical advance. Aldrich said, "I gave them one. I didn't fight the charge. There didn't seem to be much point." "You could have told the truth," she said, and there was something like accusation in it, but also something that was not quite accusation, something more complicated than that. "To whom?" he said very quietly. The war had just ended. Both sides wanted clean accounts. The Alliance wanted a betrayal to explain Coldwater Ridge. The Order wanted a coward to explain the gate. I was available for both roles simultaneously. He paused. The 600 were alive. I decided that was the thing that mattered. The fire, the snow outside, the distant sound of wind across the broken upper sections of the watchtower. "My uncle," Cora said. Her voice had changed again, and now the control in it was the control of someone holding something very large, very carefully. "He wrote to me after Coldwater Ridge. He said a human knight had opened the gate and that the knight was going to be destroyed for it." She was quiet. "He said he didn't understand. That the knight had been courteous and calm and had asked the wounded soldiers to stay toward the back walls because the eastern wall would be structurally safest during the assault." A very long pause. "He said the knight had brought them bread from the garrison stores." There wasn't much left. Aldrich said, "We'd been resupplying poorly for 2 months." Cora set down her cup. She was looking at him now, with an expression that was the most unguarded thing he had seen on her face. Not open, not soft, but stripped of its layers in a way that revealed the complexity underneath. 3 years of certainty reordering itself in real time. He did not look away from her. He did not try to make it easier. Some reckonings could not be made easier, and the attempt to do so only cheapened them. "I came here to bring you back," she said. "To stand before the Alliance Council. There are people in the northern clans who still believe you gave that gate to the human advance deliberately, that my uncle's survival was incidental." "I know," Aldrich said. "I believed it too," she said. The rawness in her voice made him be very still. "I hunted you because I believed it, because the records said it, and because the human commanders who survived the campaign confirmed it, and because—" She stopped. "Because it was easier than not knowing." "Yes," Aldrich said. He understood that particular ease. He had lived inside his own version of it for 3 years. "You never defended yourself publicly," she said. "The censure hearing. You said nothing." "No." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the watchtower, the snow had begun again. He could hear it touching the stones in a way that was almost entirely silence. "Because at the time," he said, "I thought that defending myself would require explaining in detail what the Order had intended to do, and that explanation would involve naming specific commanders and specific orders, and those commanders were still managing the ceasefire negotiations." He paused. "I thought if the ceasefire fell apart because human high command was exposed for planning a massacre, more people would die. So I said nothing." A pause. "Later, when the ceasefire had held long enough to be stable, I tried twice to present a formal account. Both times the documentation disappeared. After the second attempt, the price on my head went up considerably." Cora was completely still. "The Lauren orders warrant," she said slowly. "It wasn't old honor charges." "No," he said. "It never was. Someone has been keeping it active. Lord Marshal Fenwick," he said, "though I understand from what you mentioned at the gate that he is recently deceased." Her amber eyes moved to him with a sharpness that was almost startled. "You know about Fenwick?" "I have been managing my own survival for 3 years," he said. "I pay attention to the people who are paying attention to me." She looked at him for a long moment, with an expression that shifted through several things, before settling on something he recognized as reluctant respect. The kind that arrives when a person you have been thinking of as a problem reveals themselves to be something more complex and more formidable than a problem. "Commander Adra is also gone," she said. 6 months. No trace." "I know," he said. "The 2 people who built the official account of Coldwater Ridge have been disappearing quietly, which means whoever is still maintaining the account is moving to close it permanently." He looked at the fire. "Which means I have been running out of time for approximately 2 years without quite realizing it." "Or," Cora said, "you have been running toward something without realizing that either." He looked up at her. She was watching him with those unguarded amber eyes, and there was something in them that was not the assessment of a general, and not the cold precision of a hunter, and not the cautious reserve of a woman who had been traveling with a difficult truth for 3 days. It was something quieter than all of those things, something that had arrived in the watchtower by its own route, and was standing there without quite announcing itself. "I stopped expecting mercy long ago," Aldrich said. He had not meant to say it quite like that. It came out too plain, without the usual wrapping that made plain things easier to say. He did not try to take it back. Her expression moved. "I know," she said quietly. "It didn't stop me giving it when someone needed it." The fire crackled. She looked at him for a long time, in the way that people look at something when they are trying to reconcile the map they have been carrying with the territory standing in front of them. Then she looked down at her hands, and then back up at him, and what she said was, "No, clearly it didn't." It was not quite absolution. It was not quite forgiveness. It was something more difficult and more real than both, an acknowledgement that arrived with the full weight of the years it had cost to reach it. They sat with the fire between them in the ruined watchtower while the snow found its way through the broken sections of the wall, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was not the silence of two strangers sharing a fire. It was the silence of something that had shifted in the dark and was still settling. He noticed in the quiet that she was closer than she had been. Not significantly. A matter of inches, the natural drift of two people toward warmth. He did not move away, neither did she. After a while she said, without particular emphasis, "You should sleep. Tomorrow will require moving quickly." "We?" he said. She looked at him. "You said tomorrow will require moving quickly," he said. I assumed the pronoun was deliberate. Something moved across her face, the complicated thing, the layered thing that had been appearing more frequently, the thing that was not yet what it was becoming. "Yes," she said. The pronoun was deliberate. He lay down on his side of the fire. The cold was manageable. The hay they had found in a corner was thin but present. He lay on his back and looked at the sky through the gap in the ceiling, which was showing him the first stars of the night through a break in the clouds, and he thought about the gate at Coldwater Ridge, the 600 people, the bread he had brought from the garrison stores, and the long, strange road that had led from that specific night to this specific ceiling to a woman whose name he had been afraid of for 3 years, sitting 3 feet away from him. He slept better than he had in a very long time. In the morning she was already awake when he opened his eyes, sitting at the cold remains of the fire with her hands on her knees and her eyes on the north wall, and she said, without looking at him, "There's a settlement at Caronvale, 2 days north. The Alliance has a post there, a communications officer." "A communications officer," Aldrich said. "Someone who could send word to the council." He sat up. He felt the cold in his spine and the hunger that had become a constant background condition, and he looked at her profile against the grey light from the broken ceiling. "You're going to bring me in," he said. "I am going to present you to the council." She said, "There is a difference." She finally looked at him, and the amber eyes were direct and fully open in a way they had not been before. "I will not deliver you as a prisoner. I will bring you as a witness. What you told me last night, it needs to be heard. The commanders who contradicted that account are still alive in the human courts," Aldrich said. "They have considerably more political capital than I do." "Fenwick is dead," Cora said. "Adra is gone. The people who built the official account of Coldwater Ridge have been disappearing quietly for 2 years. I noticed this approximately 4 months ago and changed the direction of my search." A pause. "You weren't just being hunted to be brought back. You were being hunted because you are the only living witness who can give a different account." Aldrich was very still. "Which means," he said slowly, "whoever is still maintaining the account sent the Lauren Order bounty hunters," she said. "Yes." She stood and picked up her pack with the clean efficiency he had come to associate with all her physical movements. "Which means we need to move quickly." "We," he said. She paused at the word. It clearly had not been intentional. She looked at him with a complicated expression, and then said, "I have been following you for 3 days and fighting bounty hunters with you for 1. I think the designation is appropriate." They moved quickly after that, and the speed changed the texture of their travel. Where before there had been the strange tentative distance of 2 people finding the shape of a new arrangement, now there was the shared compression of urgency. She was a better navigator than he was, which he accepted without resentment, and she offered without condescension. He was better at reading human settlements, their moods and their dangers, the particular signals of a place where strangers were welcome against the signals of a place where they were not. She accepted this the same way. In the first village they bought food with the last of her money. She had money, which she produced from somewhere inside her pack without explanation, and ate it at a table outside a small inn, because the inside of the inn had 3 men in Lauren order travelling colours who had not noticed them yet, but would likely notice them given sufficient time. She ate efficiently. He ate carefully, because 3 days of very little had made his stomach suspicious of abundance. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "The field work, moving without a column, without support." "Since the war ended," she said. "The Alliance gave me the hunting mandate. I have been operating independently since." A pause. "I find it suits me better than command positions." "You were a general," he said. "I was. I still hold the rank. Formally." She looked at the bread in her hands. "But command requires certainty. You must believe in what you are asking others to do enough to ask them to die for it. I had certainty during the war. Afterward—" She was quiet for a moment. "Afterward there were things I believed that I was less sure of." "Coldwater Ridge," Aldrich said. "Among others." She looked at him. "There was a report from one of my scouts, in the aftermath of Coldwater Ridge, when we were allowed to retrieve our wounded. The scout said the garrison's larder had been opened, that the stores had been distributed." A pause. There was flour on the floor, as if bread had been baked in haste. She set down her bread. "My uncle told me the knight had brought them bread, and I told myself it was a story, a thing designed to make him look better in the telling." "It was not a story," Aldrich said. "No," she said. "I know that now." And the way she said it, very quiet, very certain, as if she had made a private decision that had nothing to do with tribunals or councils or official accounts, made him look away from her, because the alternative was looking at her too long, which he was already doing more than was sensible. In the afternoon, Cora dropped back a few paces and came up on his right side rather than his left, and he understood from the positioning that she had seen something behind them. "3 riders," she said very quietly, "since the first village." He did not look back. "Lauren colours?" "No colours. Professional. Well-equipped." A pause. "One of them has a Lauren order ring. I saw it when we stopped at the well." "So they've hired independent contractors," Aldrich said. "More expensive than bounty hunters." She said, "Someone wants this resolved urgently." He thought about Lord Marshal Fenwick dead of a convenient fever. Commander Adra vanished. The official account of Coldwater Ridge, built by powerful people for powerful reasons, requiring only one more disappearance to be permanently safe. "Can you get us to Carinvale before they decide to act?" he said. "If we leave the road," she said. "There's a trader's track through the North Woods. It adds 4 hours but removes the exposure." "Then we leave the road," he said. She gave him a look he had not seen from her before. It was brief, a flicker, but it contained something that was unmistakably approval. Not the approval of a superior for a correct, tactical choice. Something more personal than that. He filed it in the category of things he was not going to examine too closely while they were being followed by killers. The trader's track through the North Woods was narrow and dark and cold and genuinely unpleasant. They moved quickly and quietly for the first 2 hours, and when they stopped to rest at a frozen stream, she sat down beside him rather than across from him. And the proximity was easy in a way that surprised him. Not charged, not tense, just the natural close company of 2 people who had stopped pretending they were not relying on each other. "Why did you stay as a general?" he asked. Not because it was strategically relevant, because he wanted to know. She considered this. "Obligation," she said. "The Alliance needed the rank filled, and I was good at it." "That's not why," he said. She looked at him sideways. "No, it's not entirely why." A pause. I stayed because there were things I was still trying to resolve, questions that command gave me the resources to pursue. And when the questions resolved? She was quiet for a moment, watching the frozen water. Then I suppose I will need to decide what I am when I am not hunting something, she said. The way she said it was not bitter. It was honest in the way of someone who has thought about a question for a long time without yet finding its answer. I can tell you what you look like from where I'm standing, Aldrich said. She turned to look at him. They were closer than they had been, close enough that he could see the individual lines of the scars on her cheekbone, the amber of her eyes very warm in the thin light filtering through the trees. What do I look like? She said. Like someone who was given a role and did it well and now has enough experience to know the difference between the role and the person. He said, the person is still there. The role is just running out of things to do. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Her expression went through several things he did not try to name. Then she looked away, forward, at the track through the dark trees. We should move, she said. Yes, he said. Neither of them moved for another full second. They reached Unveiled at dusk. The settlement was larger than he had expected. A real town, with stone buildings and a proper market, and the Alliance post flag hanging above a headquarters building near the center. It was a mixed settlement, humans and orcs moving through the same streets without particular incident, though not without the careful peripheral awareness that characterized places where peace was old enough to be habitual, but not old enough to be invisible. The Alliance post-quartermaster was a stout orc woman named Dratha, who looked at Cora with an expression that went from professional blankness to sharp attention in the space of a second. General, she said very quietly. Sergeant, Cora said. I need the communication channel to the Council, tonight. Dratha's eyes moved to Aldrich. He held the assessment without flinching. Whatever she decided about him, it was going to be decided quickly, and he had no capacity to influence it. He is under my protection, Cora said, and the phrase was said so precisely and with such unmistakable authority that it closed the question entirely. Dratha's eyes returned to Cora. A pause. Then, the channel's available in an hour. I'll send word to clear it. The hour before the communication session was the most dangerous, and they both knew it. The three riders from the road could not have known their specific destination, but Unveiled was the logical northern waypoint, and professionals did not need to follow you every step when they understood your trajectory. Cora posted herself at the window of the small room Dratha had given them and watched the street below. Aldrich sat on the room's single chair and reviewed what he was going to say to the Council, which was the same thing he had said in his own head approximately 400 times over 3 years without anyone to say it to. When I tell the Council, he said, there will be people who don't believe it. The official account has been in place long enough that it has become the shape of the truth for many people. Yes, Cora said, not turning from the window. And the people who built the account still have enough representatives in the human courts to fight it. Yes. So this may not... He paused. This may not resolve cleanly. She turned from the window then. She was backlit by the last evening light, and she was tall and broad-shouldered and deeply, specifically real, and she looked at him for a moment before she spoke. Aldrich, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. Not Vane, not the Knight, not the Disgraced one. His actual name, said directly. I have been the Alliance's instrument for 3 years. I have authority before the Council that matters. What I say will be heard. I cannot promise the outcome, but I can promise that it will be heard. He looked at her. Why? He said quietly. Why does it matter to you now? You have a mandate to bring me in. You could do that without all of this? She was quiet for a moment. Then, because my uncle is alive, she said. Because 600 people are alive who should, according to the official account, be dead. because someone baked bread for people he did not have to save. She looked at the window, and then back at him. And because I spent 3 years hunting a man, I found a different one. I intend to be accurate about what I found. The riders came for them before the communication session. 2 came through the door, and 1 came through the window. And the professionalism of it was impressive in the way that things which are professionally terrible tend to be impressive. Cora moved before the door had fully opened. She swept the first man's weapon wide, used the door itself as a brace, and dropped the second man with an efficiency that spoke to a decade and a half of combat and made the motion look almost unremarkable. The third came through the window and was Aldrich's. He was not a trained general, but he had 11 years of field combat and the particular advantage of someone who was not surprised, which turned out to be enough. The fight was short and specific, and when it was over all 3 riders were restrained, and Dratha was at the doorway with 2 of her people, and the room was very cold from the broken window. Cora looked at the 3 restrained riders. She looked at Aldrich. There was a scratch on his forearm, where the window rider's blade had grazed him before he got control of the situation, and she looked at it for a moment with an expression that did something complicated and involuntary before she looked away. "We need to move the communication session forward," she said to Dratha. "I can have it ready in 10 minutes. Dratha said. "Do it." The council session lasted 2 hours. Aldrich spoke for the first 40 minutes, and the experience of speaking the truth of Coldwater Ridge aloud, with a witness before formal authority, in a room where a written record was being made, was something he had not prepared himself for emotionally, which meant that he was, at several points, not entirely in control of his own voice. He controlled it. He had practice. But Cora, sitting to his left, heard it, and at one point, when he described the moment he had understood that the order's command was not to hold the gate, but to hold nothing that breathed on the wrong side of it, he felt her hand close over his on the table. She did not look at him. She looked at the communication glass. Her hand stayed where it was. He finished what he had to say. The council deliberated for 50 minutes, which was, according to Dratha's quietly impressed expression, fast. They returned with a formal finding. The official account of Coldwater Ridge was suspended pending full review. Aldrich Vane's conduct was reclassified pending further investigation. The alliance warrant for his detention was revoked. Cora's testimony, added after his, was 3 minutes long and stated that in her professional assessment as a senior military authority, with 3 years of direct investigation, the Coldwater Ridge official record was incorrect and the reclassification was warranted. She said it flatly, without emphasis, in the precise clipped language of formal military address, and it landed in the session like a stone dropped into still water. When it was done, and the glass went dark, the room was very quiet. Aldrich sat and looked at the table, and felt something shifting inside him that he did not immediately have a word for. It was not happiness exactly. It was not relief. It was more like the feeling of having carried a weight for so long that you no longer felt it as a weight, only as yourself, and then someone lifted it, and the first sensation was not freedom, but the strange, unfamiliar lightness of a body that does not know what to do with its own unencumbered shape. He heard Cora push her chair back and stand. He heard Dratha take the restrained riders out of the room. He sat still and breathed. After a moment, Cora came and stood beside him. "Aldrich," she said. He looked up at her. "It begins here," she said. "It does not end here. There will be a full hearing. Human courts will push back. It will take time." She paused. "It will be difficult. I know," he said, "but it begins here." He looked at her for a long moment. She was watching him with the amber eyes steady and open and close, and she was standing with the particular stance of someone who is committed to a position and does not intend to leave it. 3 years, he said. "You spent 3 years hunting me." "Yes. And now you've told the council I'm worth the full hearing." "Yes. That's a significant revision," he said. Her mouth moved, and this time the not smile became something more definite, Not wide, not bright, but real. Unmistakably real. The kind of expression a face makes when it stops managing itself and simply responds. "You gave me your last coin," she said, "when you had nothing. It is not so large a revision as you might think." He reached into his pocket. The coin was not there. He had spent it days ago and remembered the moment he had done so. And his hand found only empty fabric. He looked down at his empty hand, and something that was embarrassingly close to a laugh moved through him, thin and tired and genuine. "I don't have it," he said. "I know," she said. She reached into her own pack and produced a copper disc, worn smooth on one face where a king's profile had been pressed into the metal, and set it in his open palm. "You left it on the cobblestone," she said. "I picked it up." He looked at the coin. He looked at her. "You've been carrying it," he said. "For 3 days," she said, "while following you, while fighting bounty hunters beside you, while deciding—" She stopped, and for the first time since he had known her, something that looked like uncertainty crossed her face. Not the controlled uncertainty of a general reading an ambiguous situation. Something personal and quiet and tentative. "While deciding," she finished, "what kind of man I had actually found." "And?" he said. She reached out and folded his fingers over the coin, her hand large and warm and deliberate over his. The contact held a moment longer than necessity required, and it was simple, and it was specific, and it said what it said. "The kind worth keeping," she said. Outside the Alliance post, the town of Caronvale was finishing its evening in the ordinary way of towns that have survived difficult histories without quite resolving them. Fires lit, doors closing, the quiet negotiation of people choosing warmth over cold. Snow was beginning to fall, soft and unhurried, the kind of snow that looked like gentleness from inside a lit room. He did not let go of her hand. She did not take it back. They stood there in the quiet room in the beginning of snow, and the specific warmth of two people who had been tired for a very long time, finding carefully and without fanfare something worth being less tired for. It was not the end of difficult things. It was the beginning of a different kind of difficult, the kind that came with another person in it, someone who knew your weight and chose to stand beside you anyway. He thought about the gate at Durnwall, the torchlight, the cold cobblestone, a coin set down between them in the particular silence of mercy given without expectation. He thought about hands that give instead of take. He pressed the coin back into her palm. She looked down at it, and then up at him, and the amber eyes were warm and unguarded and entirely themselves, and what they held was not the end of a hunt, but the beginning of something that had no name yet and did not need one. She kept it.